Welcome back to the Budget Archive. My name is Mitch, and thank you once again to TCG Architect for sponsoring this video. TCG Architect is just coming up with a new feature, being the featured articles on the right over here. These are articles or blogs that get released daily and have a lot of different information within them. They can have everything from tournament reports through to deck guides, through to just information on where to find the latest stuff on the newest sets. They are released by multiple different creators within the community space, everyone from Frostbite Gaming here, all the way down to Main Deck down the bottom here. I am currently working on my first article, however it is a very large article so it is taking a bit of time. You can expect that to be released within the next couple of weeks. For now, let's get on to the deck list. Before we get started, make sure to let me know what you think about this overlay. I'm messing around with a few different ones at the moment, but this is the one I like the most. I'm not 100% sold on the video being down the bottom left of the screen. However, it is the cleanest one I've been able to come up with so far. Now, starting with Fractals, if you haven't played this before or you haven't seen it played, it is effectively a deck where you want to control the board state while getting as many Fantasia Fractals onto the board as possible, and then use a card called Burst Asunder down here in order to sacrifice all those Fractals at once and kill your opponent in one hit. There are a lot of ways your opponents can play around this, so we'll go over that in a bit. Starting us off, we have Spirit of Water. We have Diachan Enchantress. On it to put 2 Glimmer counters on her. It has an inherited effect of tap, activate a reaction spell card from your memory, pay its reserve cost only by removing that many Glimmer counters, and activate this only during your opponent's turn. So the thing to remember here is it must be a reaction spell card. So if the card says reaction skill or just spell, not reaction, it can't be played with her effect. However, most of the things in this deck that we care about are going to be able to be played with her. We've then got Enfeebling Orb. 0 drop, banish it, target opponent puts 2 cards from their hand into their memory. A lot of the time when you're going for your kill, you don't want your opponent to have a lot of interaction in their hand or availability to just stop you from doing what you want to do. So Enfeebling Orb is one of those cards that we have that we're able to bring out onto the board and use it at the right time to force your opponent to put stuff into their memory so they don't have enough stuff in their hand in order to interact with you. Fire Resonance Bauble. If you've watched enough of my videos, you know I love the baubles. We have got the Wind Resonance Bauble on the main board here as well, and Water Resonance Bauble on the sideboard over here. These are interchangeable, depends on your local meta, depends what you want to play. However, they are just a good draw piece to have, enabling you to get a card up without costing you anything. Safeguard Amulet, another 0 drop Regalia. Banish it, if your champion would take non-combat damage this turn, prevent 4 of that damage. Another staple Regalia that's used in all budget decks. It's great into not only other fractal decks trying to kill you with bursts, because as we'll talk about soon, burst is individual damages of 2. It's not one massive hit, but it is good into a lot of different meta decks that are getting played at the moment. Scepter of Fascination. This is a 1 cost on enter, draw a card. Banish it, wake up your champion and put 2 Glimmer counters on your champion. This is a prime piece of Regalia used in Diachan, just because your whole game plan is based around controlling the game state, and because a lot of the spells we'll see soon are reactions, you want to be able to use them on your opponent's turn to either do some damage to them or negate their spells or their cards, enabling you to get an advantage within the game. Spelled Scepter, 0 drop, hindered, so it comes in rested, and banish it, the activation of the next card you activate this turn can't be negated. This is absolutely insane, especially if you know your opponent is only holding a negate and hasn't got any type of prevention to play around with besides that negate. Then this is going to be one of those things that can just win you the game on the spot. Terraforming, 0 drop, banish it until the end of your turn. Players can't declare attacks unless they pay 2 for each declaration. Activate it only on your opponent's recollection phase. This is another piece of prime budget Regalia. It's not even a budget Regalia, it's used in pretty much, not every deck, but a lot of different decks run it. There hasn't been a huge amount of allies being played recently, so this is one of those ones you could possibly look at cutting if you wanted something else to go into this deck, or if you had some of the more expensive Regalia that could possibly go in here. However, it is a great piece to have just to give you that one turn to survive if your opponent's got a massive board. Type Proclamation, another 1 cost. You do want to be careful of how many one costs you have, just because a lot of the time there is a lot of floating memory hate and such going on in the meta, so you're not going to have access to it all the time. However, I do find that this is a decent card for the budget version, just being a one cost to use up some of that float that you may have laying around not being used. And it also draws you a card, so replaces the card you lose, and players can't draw more than 3 cards each turn, unless it's their first turn of the game. The main one with this is in normal fractals, you run a lot of Zhangs, which are effectively a 3-drop that draws you 2 cards. However, that is very expensive and does not fit within the budget. So if you're running them in your deck, I wouldn't recommend Tithe. However, when you're running a version like this, which draws a lot less cards than the actual version of the deck would, then this is a good thing to be able to control your opponent's hand size and not let them get too far ahead while you're trying to play your games. Viridian Protective Trinket. This is the wrong version here. I need to actually talk to TCG Architect about possibly changing the version permanently, just because it isn't a banish effect. The effect is just a static effect that during your turn, water element cards your opponents activate cost 2 more to activate. So a lot of time when you run into other water decks, they're playing the exact same game state as you in terms of trying to control it, trying to stop you from doing your game plan, or they play theirs. This is a good thing to be able to bring out on that critical turn where you can go for kill, knowing that they might only have 3 cards in hand with something like a Frostbind that could stop you. Bringing this out means that they're no longer going to be able to activate that. The other thing to note is if your opponent has one of these out, or if you're versing another Fractal player, Diachan's ability, because it requires you to take that many Glimmer counters off her in order to activate the cost of that card, this does increase the cost of that card. So if you have this out and they only have 2 Glimmer counters on their champion, they cannot activate a 2 cost from their memory. They can only activate a 0 cost. However, if they've got Scepter Fascination already out, they can then crack that, put it onto Diachan, give her the 4 Glimmer counters total, and then activate 1 card. But if they're doing that, you're probably in a good place. Wind Resonance Ball, we've already talked about that. Crystalline Mirror. Whenever a Fantasia enters the field under your control, glimpse 1. We're playing a lot of Fantasias, so you're going to be glimpsing a lot if you have this on the field. But the main reason we have this in the deck is to banish it, destroy target item, destroy target item memory cost 0 or reserve cost 3 or less. Activate this only if you control 3 or more Fantasias. That last part, you're generally going to control more than 3 Fantasias, so it's not going to really worry about it too much. However, being able to get rid of something that's causing you a problem, generally Censor of Restful Peace, which is a 0-drop, cards and graveyards have no abilities. That's going to turn off all your floating memory, which can cause you a bit of pain sometimes. However, it can also get rid of things like Safeguard and sometimes Terrafring, not so much in this deck. We're only running a couple allies. But this is just one of those things that can get rid of that hate piece early on, so that you're not having to worry about that when you go for your kill. Moving on to the main deck, we have Fractal of Insight. It's a 2-cost Fantasia Fractal that on enter you may rest it if you do Glimpse 2. I'll mention now that most of these Fractals have a thing called Reservable. Effectively, you may tap it to pay 1 cost while playing a card. This is a great turn 1 play because it allows you to set up the top of your deck, or also getting Fractals on board to set up for your later turns. We then have Shimmering Refraction. It's a 2-cost. Deal X damage to target unit, where X is the amount of Fantasias you control. This is another thing to note with this deck, is that this is Fantasia. A lot of the things that we'll see say Fractals. So the difference is that on Fractal of Insight here, it says Fantasia Mage Fractal. So this is a Fantasia and a Fractal. However, if we look down here, Jianyu, you've got a unique Fantasia Cleric spell. So this is only a Fantasia, not a Fractal. So it will only count for things like Shimmering Refraction, but won't count for other things that require Fractals. This also has the ability bonus for Diachan of if Shimmering Refraction was activated from your memory, draw a card into your memory. So this is a good card to have in order to do some damage in the late game, especially if your opponent's in a situation where they're not really threatening you too much and you don't care about having the Diachan ability to react to them going into their turns. You can effectively, at the end of their turn, use this, deal a bunch of damage to them, replace it by drawing a card into your memory, and then move into your turn, having already done a bunch of damage to them. Then have Unstable Fractal, so the 2-cost. It's hindered, so it does enter rested. has reservable as well, and then has the ability of pay 3, tap it, sacrifice it. As a spell, destroy target item, memory cost 0, or reserve cost 5 or less. This is one of those perfect fractals to have, just because although it does end it hindered, which can hurt sometimes, it is also a great thing to be able to remove your opponent's hate pieces, especially if you haven't had time to bring out Crystalline Mirror yet, or you're in a situation where you've already had to pop Crystalline Mirror and they've got another hate piece that you want to be able to remove before you go for your kill turn. We've then got Acquiescing Rejection. This is an amazing card. It's fairly new, but it's amazing. It hasn't been played for a long time. I think True Champ might have made it popular with their version of the deck, but it's effectively a 4 cost that becomes a 3 cost once you level up, and negate target card activation you don't control unless its controller has you draw 2 cards. Banish the card that activated this way. This is insane. A lot of the time, your opponent's not going to want their thing negated, so they're going to be letting you draw those 2 cards. And in this game, drawing is incredibly powerful. So giving you that influence is something they probably don't necessarily want to do, but they're going to have to do in a lot of the time. But the thing is, once you've drawn those 2 cards, maybe you've got another gate in your hand. You can just negate it with something else then. So not only have you gone +2 on influence, well, +1 with this, you effectively end up going even on influence, getting rid of the thing that they didn't want, or you didn't want them to have, and you're not really hurt over it. Burst Asunder. This is a 4 cost with class bonus, costs 2 less. Deal 2 damage to target unit, then you may sacrifice any amount of fractals. For each fractal sacrificed this way, deal an additional 2 damage to that unit. So the main thing you want to know with this card is this is your main kill card. This is what you're trying to get to. This is what you're trying to set up in order to completely wipe out your opponent. What you have to note here is that because of the way it's written, you sacrifice each fractal individually at the same time, but then you're in a situation where all those sacrifices put a separate instance of damage on the stack. So each damage is only 2. So if they have anything that can prevent 1, 2, 3 damage, it's going to prevent all that damage. It's not like other cards where it stacks up completely and it's 15 damage total. It's going to be 5 instances of 2 or whatever it ends up being, depending on how many fractals you sack. So you really want to be in a situation where you know your opponent's not going to be able to interact. However, this does happen after it's resolved. So effectively your opponent has to respond to you sacrificing the fractals. Effectively to you activating the card. Otherwise, once this resolves, that's when you then choose to sacrifice all the fractals. And there is no instance where they can then react to all those triggers. They will all resolve at once, killing your opponent without any interaction. So you can use these to bait out your opponent's interaction, especially if you've got 2 or 3 of these in hand, by playing it, getting to use that interaction, and then just passing turn and hopefully surviving your opponent's turn, going into your turn, and then being able to play another one knowing your opponent's got no interaction left. Deep Sea Fractal. This is a 2 cost, enters hindered. On enter, each player puts the top 2 cards of their top card of their deck into the graveyard, also as reservable. So this is a good card to play when you've already played a Fractal of Insight. You just put a floating memory on top of your deck, and then you're able to play this, milling that into your graveyard, and then possibly milling something from your opponent's deck that they don't want you to mill. It's generally not played in Fractals. This is probably one of those cards you cut if you're bringing some of the upgrades in, but I just found it was a decent card to have in this version of the deck. Fractal of Intrusion. A 3-drop. On enter, you may banish a card with floating memory from your graveyard. If you do, look at target opponent's memory and discard a card from it. Memory hate is one of the things I hate in this game, but it is needed and it feels great when it happens. Well, when you do it. So a lot of the time in this deck, we do have a decent amount of floating, as we'll see soon. So we're able to put the floating into our bin and then put us in a position where we can then get rid of that floating out of the bin, get rid of something out of your opponent's memory that you might care about. There are certain decks this will affect more, and over time you kind of learn what decks you do want to go all in and play this against, and what decks you don't really care about playing it. This is another one of those ones that generally the deck runs 2 or 3 of these. So you can probably cut one of these if you are looking to add some more expensive cards in. Fractal Rain, 2 cost, imbue 2 at the beginning of your recollection phase. Fractal Rain is imbued. Target opponent puts the top card of their deck into their graveyard. Target player, not target opponent. Generally, you don't imbue this in this deck. You can, but a lot of the time, you don't want to lose a lot of the stuff that's in your deck, and you don't really want to be in a situation of having to give your opponent floating memory or fire cards or anything from their deck that they don't want to lose. So it can be a catch-22. Sometimes it's worth it, sometimes it's not. It just depends on the game. Apologies, had a slight interruption there, but I'm back. So continuing on, we have Fractal Refreshment. This is one of the main cards in your deck that allows you to kind of reset your hand and keep going. So it's a 3 cost with reservable that on enter you may reveal up to 3 water element cards from your memory and put them on the bottom of your deck in any order, then draw that many cards into your memory. So a lot of the time, late game, you may end up with a bit of a clunked hand with either counter spells or interaction that isn't really going to help you. And this is a great way to be able to put that to the bottom, reset your hand, and keep playing. Fractal Snow. It's a 2-drop with reservable that you can sacrifice it. The next time one or more allies would enter the field this turn, they enter the field rested instead. Now, this isn't an absolute must-have for the deck. It is worth a couple dollars, I believe. However, it is a great thing to have, especially if your opponent is in a situation where they're going to have an ally enter that's going to cause you to die. So being able to just sacrifice this, cause that ally to enter rested, and then be able to go for kill on your turn can be a great way to turn the tide of the game. Frostbind, 2-drop, negate target activation unless its controller pays 2. This is a staple negate in the game. It isn't played as much as it used to be just because there are better negates now. However, it is still a great card to have. It's one that I'd recommend putting on all your budget water decks just because it can give you a situation where your opponent's going for a kill. Maybe they had just enough cards to go for it, and having this just wins you the game. Frostborn Paladin. This is a card that a lot of people are probably surprised to see within the deck. It is still a little bit pricey. I think it's just over $5 each currently as we're recording. However, it's in here because with the Mordred Recollection deck coming out soon, this is getting a reprint in that deck. I do see it dropping to, I don't know, $1 card probably. It's not going to be worth a lot because you get a playset in every Mordred deck. It's similar to Dungeon Guide. I don't see Dungeon Guide dropping as much, but Frostborn is definitely going to be a very budget deck card going forward. So I just wanted to fit in this deck. And surprisingly, as we'll see in the breakdown soon, it does actually fit in here pretty nicely. Glimmering Refusal. This is your main negate in this deck. It's 2 cost. Negate target card activation unless its controller pays X, where X is the amount of Phantasias you control. Banish a card that had its activation negated this way. This is another one that cares about Phantasias, not Fractals. So Giant U does affect it as well. A lot of the time you're going to have 5, 6 Fractals on board most games. If you don't, especially in this version of the deck, something's gone wrong. However, a lot of the time, if you play this, your opponent's not going to be able to resolve whatever they're playing. So this can be a great card to have just to cause a swing of momentum within the game and give you that leg up. Giant U Fate's Premonition. We're only running one of this in the deck because it is a unique Fantasia. Some people will run 2 just to guarantee you're going to see it most games. However, it is one of those ones that's not needed in the deck. However, it does give you a good advantage when you do see it. It has class bonus of costing 2 less, so in this deck it can cost 2 if you've got Diachan already on the field. It has, as it enters the field, choose a card name, any card name. Cards with the chosen name cost 2 plus X more to activate, where X is the amount of Phantasias you control. Important thing to note here is it does say activate, not materialization, so you can't name a Regalia that requires materialization, as it won't affect that. Yes, you can name Regalia that require activation or can be activated, because that'll most likely stop them from activating it that way, but they can still materialize it. So you're most likely going to be playing your opponent's kill card of some kind, whether it's Fireball, Lightweaver's Assault, Shadow Strike, just anything along those lines that will effectively put your opponent in a position where they have to try and get rid of this, or have to get to a high enough influence that they're going to actually be able to activate those and kill you. Fractal Missile. Deal damage to target unit equal to the amount of fractals you control, +1. It also has floating memory. So this is a 3 cost fast speed, this is the card that cares about fractals. So Xian Yu is not going to count towards the damage on this. However, this does 1 plus damage itself, so it's not really an effect too much. A lot of the time, you're going to be playing this on your opponent's end step or during their turn, just in order to do a bunch of damage to them before you go to your turn. However, there may be situations where you want to activate this during your recollection, just to deal a bunch of damage to them or to force them to pop their interaction now before you go into your turn and waste something like a Burst Asunder. Song of Frost. So we've got 2 main board and 1 sideboard, as we can see. This is if a unit is attacking in the combat phase. 2 drop fast speed. The class bonus doesn't matter because we aren't Tamer. This is just one of those cards that effectively if your opponent's playing something like a Shadow Strike or something along those lines that's going to kill you very fast, then this is the perfect card to have just because it would stop that combat phase, end it. They're not going to be able to do any damage. It's important to note that this also affects triggers. So if your opponent's playing Seiyuu and they attack with the Seiyuu's command active and they got the 3 triggers in order to put an Arcane Blast in their banishment, empower, and then be able to play it for free, you can respond to those triggers playing this. It'll end the combat phase, banishing the stack, and they will not get those triggers so that they will not be able to deal that 11 damage to you with the Arcane Blast. Thronekeeper Bullfrog, 3 drop 0/4 with Taunt and Floating Memory. So we don't have as much floating memory in this deck as I'd like. However, there isn't really much more we can add in. So we have got the 8 total, but it is enough to guarantee you 1 or 2 float a game, to get the Diachan out, to get the Scepter Fascination out, and then most likely that Tithe. Yes, we have the Frostborn Paladin as well that likes to eat the float, but as you'll find when you're playing this deck, you often aren't really using float to level up because by the time you see the float, you don't want to waste your Refracting Missiles too early. And then the Thronekeeper Bullfrog, a lot of the time your opponent will sit there and wait, leaving it alive, waiting for you to level up so that you can't take advantage of the floating memory. So, which is good on your thing. It just means that you got effectively a defender and they're not doing chip damage to you throughout the first few turns. However, if they do kill it, you got floating memory in the bin, so it's a good card to have. Moving on to sideboard. This is where things get a little bit interesting with this deck list, because I've chosen a couple cards that aren't really played in a normal version. We've got Candlelight Hourglass. This is a 1 cost that on enter draw a card. On charge 2, it gains activated abilities of allies you control, costs 2 more to activate. So a lot of the time with this deck, we haven't got a lot of interaction for allies. There's not a lot of ways to remove allies, except for Chill the Bone, as we'll see soon. So this is a good thing to have, especially if you're playing into some meta decks that are running things like Sadi. Bringing this out pretty early on, getting the charge 2, which I should probably let you guys know. Charge is effectively at the beginning of recollection phase, put a charge counter on it. So once it's been out for 2 recollection phases, including the one that it was first brought out just before, you will get this effect. So it's fairly easy to get it. And then that's going to mean that if they want to bounce Sadi, it's going to cost them 4, which is a lot higher of a cost to pay and can often leave you in situations where they're not able to pay a lot of their ability costs for allies and units, giving you just a little bit of an advantage, slowing them down a bit and giving you a situation where you can take control of the game state. Water Resistance Bauble, we've already talked about this. Now the Fine Lantern. There is still a lot of fire aggro decks running around the meta, as well as things like Genbu. The odd amount. Genbu's a weird one where it's kind of jumps into the meta, wins an ascent, and then just kind of disappears again. I'm sure we'll see it back, so it's still a card I recommend running in most of your sideboards. Just 0 cost, cards in graveyard are norm element. We don't really care about that in this deck because we have nothing that really cares about the color of your cards except for the Fractal of Refreshment, which of course is from memory, so this isn't even going to affect that. Chill to the Bone. We've got 3 copies of this in sideboard. It's a 2 cost fast activation. Target attacking ally gets -2, -2 until end of turn. If you have 2 or more Phantasias, that ally gets -4, -4 instead. Of course, in this deck, we're generally going to have 2 or more Phantasias. It's very rare that we don't. So this is most likely going to be a -4, -4 to any unit that's attacking you. And at the moment, a lot of allies are becoming 4 toughness, which is real hard to get through a lot of the time. But having this in the deck just gives us that situation where even if your opponent puts a 2/3 on board and puts a buff counter on it, you're still able to remove it with a fast speed activation rather than having to fight around the fact of having to use something like a refracting missile in order to kill it early on. This is one of those ones that I probably wouldn't play this version of the deck without it. It could be mainboard. However, if you're not playing allies, it does become a bit of a dead card then. Song of Frost, already talked about it. And Tidal Lock. We've already got 8 counter spells in this deck. Some people run 14 in their decks. I don't know why. They hate playing the game, obviously. But Tidal Lock is just one of those good cards to have. The thing here is that Tidal Lock is the one card that gets turned off by Nullifying Lantern in your deck. So if you're bringing Nullifying Lantern in, you probably don't want to bring Tidal Lock in. However, you find that you're not going to be bringing Lantern in. Tidal Lock could be a good card to bring in for something in your deck that might be not helping you in the current game. Like if your opponent's not attacking at all, you could get rid of Song of Frost, bring 2 Tidal Locks in, and you'll be good to go. Yes, I know what you're thinking. Unmake Duality is only 15 cents. Why isn't it already in the main board? Reason for that is Looking Glass. It combos perfectly with Looking Glass. It can combo with stuff like GCR as well. However, the Looking Glass is the main one that it works perfectly with, because Looking Glass begins the game on the field already, giving you a Divine Relic ready to sacrifice with Unmake in order to draw 2. This is just the most broken combo in the game. The Looking Glass is $170 currently. $170 for a staple Regalia in any game is ridiculous. So it is getting reprinted in RDO, which is important to note because the reprint version will be a lot cheaper than $170. I can pretty much guarantee that. However, I don't know if the first ed version will come down too much because the new one will have a non-full up version of it. So if you want the fancy version, you're going to need the first ed version. However, I would not recommend buying this right now. There is a good chance that Unmake Duality gets banned in the next ban announcement, just because this combo is overtaking every deck. If a deck doesn't need a certain Divine Relic for it, then it is running Unmake Duality and the Looking Glass. Hell, even some Merlin and Lorraine lists that run the Looking Glass in order to run share size and such are running a 1 copy of Unmake. So once they get to level 3 and are able to play those share size out just whenever they want, they'll then just sacrifice the Looking Glass, draw the 2 cards, and keep playing the game. Moving on to some more consistency upgrades, is what we'll call it, is Cerulean Decree. This is a 3-cost fast activation. Imbue 3, choose 1. If it is imbued, choose 2 instead. Negate up to 1 target non-attack card activation unless a controller pays 2. Up to 1 target unit's attacks get negative 3 until end of turn, and draw a card into your memory. So a lot of what this is effectively a Frostbind, negating a card unless they pay 2. This is non-attack cards, so you do have to be careful with that. It won't target things like Shadow Strike, like Frostbind might. However, it also has the ability of choosing to give something a negative attack if it is going to kill your Frostbind on the board or deal damage to you, causing you to die. Most of the time, though, you're going to be using this in conjunction with the draw into memory. So effectively, you're going to be trying to negate one of their cards while replacing this card itself as well. It is important to note these effects are redundant of each other, so they don't care about each other. So if the negate doesn't work because they get rid of the card from the stack somehow, you'll still draw into memory. And if something's stopping you from drawing to memory, you'll still be able to negate the spell. Jiangzhou, Way of Peace. It's a unique cleric ally for 3 cost. It's a 1/2 that has on enter, depending on the amount of cards in your memory, draw 2 cards. If you have 0 in your memory. If you have 0 cards in your memory, draw 2. That is just broken in any game. It's almost worse than Unmake Duality here, because rather than having to sacrifice something, you're just having a unit into the field. You got a unit on the board as well, and you're also able to draw 2. Now, most decks, that wouldn't be possible. It'd be very hard to make you have 0 cards in your memory after paying 3 for this. But in Fractals, we've got so many Fractals able to pay that cost. You're generally going to be drawing 2 every time you play this. You may have to pay a card every now and again if something happens, but even if you have to play something into your memory just to allow this to enter, you're still going to recover 4 off it entering. That's not a bad effect. Then if you have a lot of stuff in your memory, like you've been playing a long game, you've got low influence, then in a glimpse 4, searching for that kill card, still not a bad thing. And if you've got a stupid amount of influence, which you generally won't in this version of the deck, but in the actual version you possibly could, each opponent discards a card at random from their memory. It isn't as broken as some of the discard from memory cards, However, it is still a decent effect if you're in the late game and you just need to start controlling your opponent's influence. Being $30 each, they're both on the pricier side. You do need you didn't need 4 Zhangs, definitely. Cerulean, you can probably get away with 2 or 3 in the deck. However, a lot of will run 4 instead of the 4 Frostspines. So you are getting up there in price for the deck if you're trying to build the actual version of it. Frozen Dismissal at only $7 isn't too bad. It's a 3 cost, fast activation, clear expel reaction, so it can be played with Zhang's ability. Cerulean Decree, on the other hand, can't because it isn't a reaction card. Has a class bonus of costing 1 less activate, so it's actually going to cost you 2. And negate target ally unless its opponent pays 4. A lot of the time in this game, players are playing Dungeon Guides, Ghosts of Pendragons, Cheshire Cats, just a lot of allies that you really don't want to see hit the board. So this is a great way to be able to control the game, banish those allies. A lot of the time when your opponent are playing those type of things, they're not going to have 4 cards in hand to pay this cost. And even if they do, forcing them to put their whole hand down to the memory just to get an ally is generally going to be good for you rather than for them. Now, these are your kind of Regalia upgrades. Potential's Tengu, not really going to do you much in this deck. It's effectively another version of Backup Charger. So it's just 0 cost Regalia, pay 3, banish it, draw a card to memory. It's just a bit more draw power for your deck and allowing you to not have to worry about banishing floating memory or anything in order to replace itself to draw a card. A lot of the time this isn't needed, but if you are looking for a bit of consistency to the deck, a bit more draw power, and maybe you bought both the recollections together, then you'll have a copy of this, and why not chuck it in? Now, we'll skip over Fractals for a second and go to Backup Charger. This is probably the first Regalia upgrade I'd say definitely get, because it is 0 cost, pay 3, banish it, summon a Power Cell token rested, draw a card into memory. Not only are you replacing, well, not replacing itself, but gaining a card, but you're also getting this Power Cell token on the right here, which in this deck you may be thinking doesn't really do much. However, when we combo it with the Fractalize here, which is target item or weapon becomes a Cleric Fractal Fantasia, we're reservable and loses all our abilities. Also having floating memory. I think a 2 cost fast activation card is amazing with this. If you have 6 cards in your hand going into your materialization phase, you bring out Backup Charger, pay the 3, sacrifice it, draw a card to memory, get this Power Cell token, and then you are able to pay 2, play the Fractalize into Power Cell, and now you've got enough Fractal on board. That not only in later turns can tap to pay a cost or something, but also when you come to doing that Burst Asunder turn, it's another Fractal you can sacrifice to do 2 more damage. Now going on to our price breakdown. Here we have the prices of each individual card. I'll give you a second just to pause the video and have a look at all the pricing if you would like, before I go into the totals. You're good. Okay, material deck, we've got $2.63. Main deck, we've got $47.77. And sideboard, we've got $1.16. So the main thing here is that Frost ones are actually down to $4.50 at the time of recording this. I do think that'll get a bit lower, which will give us a little bit more room within this deck, as we are slightly over budget. However, not too much to worry about it, especially with the reprint coming in. A lot of these cards in this deck are very cheap and are very easy to get a hold of, especially if you've got people around you that have been playing a little while. There'll be a lot of these cards within their bulk. If you are struggling to find cards and you're in New Zealand, give me a message on Facebook or on Discord. I'll be able to help you out and sort you out with a lot of different stuff in this list. Same goes for all my other lists as well. Any list I make, I've generally got a lot of the common uncommons in my bulk here that I'm happy to give to players. It just becomes paying for shipping, and possibly if cards are worth a little bit more, like the Frostborns, you may have to pay a few dollars for them. But in any region, there are players that have thousands of cards of bulk just sitting in their wardrobes who are prepared to help out new players and help the game grow. So just reach out. If you're on Merlin's Discord, just chuck a message into the looking for chat, and I'm sure there'll be people that will be able to sort you out a whole list for not too much. So going on to the total of this deck, we're at $51.56. For a fractal deck like this that can have a huge amount of effect on the game, not only beat meta decks, but can also control virtually any deck that can come against it, this is a great price tag. There are definitely a lot of stuff you can do with the deck to improve the consistency of it, adding Zhangs in, adding the Fractalize and the Backup Charger. However, they aren't needed to just play this deck and have some fun, you will find that you often end up in situations where you have very low influence or you're just not able to draw the cards that your opponent is. And that's normal with a lot of budget decks. There isn't a lot of draw power outside of fire. If you did have something like Loss of Thought, we'd be in a lot better position here, but we don't. So I did a bit of messing around with this deck, and I found this is probably the best version you can have on this type of budget. We did look at going a bit more into the ally side of things with a bit more floating memory. However, in the end, it ended up just becoming my Nico Allies Sylvie deck. So I just kind of decided to stick to Fractals. It is just a Fractal deck. Your whole game plan is basically turboing out Fractals and trying to kill your opponent. There will be a version of this deck I might make in the future where it'll be a little more higher power while still keeping to a budget, just because I do think a few of these cards like Fracturize and such is going to come down with the reprint, which will make it more viable to maybe fit into a $100 budget. I want to once again thank TCG Architect for sponsoring this video. I love what they've going on with their site. It isn't only a deck builder, it's a community builder. We've got the featured articles from all our favorite creators, but on top of that, we've also got this forum area up here. This is an area where you can go, make a form, talk to other players, talk to all us creators, throw ideas around, and then it is always here, always accessible. The one problem with Discord is that quite often when you say something in a chat or you say something in a channel, it just disappears instantly. There's so many replies going on, so much things getting condensed into one single chat that stuff just disappears. This is a place where you can have specific chats going on about a specific thing, and it's always going to be there. You're always going to be able to scroll back through, look at the chats, look at all the answers, and never really lose that information. I'd highly recommend you players coming to TCG Arctic, checking out the site, building some decks, and just having some chats with us just to get some ideas of what they want to do. I'd also love to thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and make sure to check out my other videos. Until next time, stay safe.